Okay, I think we can begin. We were working on the German case. Guten Morgen, meine Damen und Herren. We have been working on the German case, and we shall be continuing with it. Last time we started off with a discussion on German lands in historical perspective. So milestones, state tradition. So this morning, my plan is to continue with it, complete that discussion, and jump onto political economy of economic and social policies. So once again, the plan is intact as usual. We'll continue with state tradition, state in history. Then we'll start talking about political economy, governance and policy making, participation and interest representation, and then followed by some discussion on current debates. We were working on the Third Reich, and then the Weimar Republic, Hitler coming to power, having conquered much of Europe, had attacked, excuse me, the USSR, and then, ladies and gentlemen, and then concentration camps, well, extermination camps, Holocaust. This was a phenomenal event in history, or series of events. In Germany, more than 6 million Jews, Roma, and homosexuals were persecuted. The unwanted had been evaporated, whose lives had been seen as worthless. And exploitation in the concentration camps translated into extermination in the extermination camps. And this was through a systematic and bureaucratic apparatus of the state. So this is the definition of genocide. So in the early stages, everything began with racist attacks, anti-Semitic propaganda, then taking away of rights of Jews, not only rights but also property. Then Jews were being confined to ghettos, especially in large cities, and then millions were bystanders. Millions watched things roll out. But the point here I want to remind you is that all state institutions were involved, that this was carried out through the apparatus of all apparatuses of the state, directly or indirectly. So military, industry, including private industry, banks, science, medicine, they all cooperated against the unwanted. So this was a shock in world history. Anyway, so this is where we had left off, and we're fast forwarding. This is the map. You'll remember where Hitler went into. Parts of USSR, much of Europe, almost all of Europe, except for Sweden up north, Spain and Portugal down south. Turkey was the buffer there. And this is the devastation. The Reichstag of 1945, Frankfurter Alle 1945, the Brandenburg Gate, 1945, you see cars toppled. This is what it looks like in the contemporary period. This is the Unter den Linden, basically. I think it's from that side. Unter den Linden, the main avenue in Berlin. What it looked like back in 1945, that's 1990s for you. These were the pictures that looked alike, so I brought them with me here. All bombarded, all plastered. This is the Berlin Cathedral, 45, and now 97. But I think that building was also under renovation. I think that the new, I should bring a new photo because I think this building no longer exists, the modern building. So fast forwarding everything to 1990s. But before then, we see German lands under occupation in that for about 4 to 5 years. We have West Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany, under Allied control, Bundesrepublik Deutschland. And the other part is the GDR, the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, German Democratic Republic under Soviet control. So occupation, Germany divided into two for a period. Then from 1949, 1950s onwards, we see in the early period, right after occupation, we have emergence of two units, neither of which were fully sovereign. So they were under some kind of power or some kind of block or some kind of influence from either of the sides. So under Cold War conditions, hefty Cold War conditions. The Federal Republic saw increasing levels of political stability in time. So, and political stability brought with it democracy. So the West got democratized in time, full-fledged democracy, rapid economic growth through what's called regulated market economy. We'll talk about details later on. But we see the Western part growing, democracy consolidating, political stability sustained, and we see high levels of welfare for citizens. And we have a large, comprehensive welfare state. So the German miracle built also side by side with the economic miracle. There was a welfare state, very comprehensive welfare state, which had its origins back in Bismarckian times, late 19th century. But this was the time when the German welfare state was consolidated, when the German welfare state became a comprehensive, protective apparatus, protecting citizens against risks in the labor market. And the idea, remember, I showed you the map of 1500s, Holy Roman Empire, then Prussia. The idea of principalities, kingdoms, city-states are now the German Länder, the land, the provinces, the state level. So we have strong regional governments within a federal unit in the West. In the East, this was the DDR, the GDR, was controlled by the Socialist Unity Party, Communist Stalinist Party, very high levels of educational attainment, another type of welfare state, so humongous, very serious social protection, full employment. We all thought when I was growing up, when we were all growing up, the East was also endowed with high levels of technology. But when 1990s came, we realized that this wasn't the case. So anyway, the economy was not as vibrant. It was more or less a command economy. under Soviet type of planning. Then comes after 1990, but this is, I'm sorry, this is what the East and the West looks like. 11 Länder here, 5 Länder here, and this is going to be united back in 1990. We celebrated the 25th anniversary back in November last year, in 2015. So one doesn't realize how much, how fast time passes. So reunification and immediate aftermath of reunification. This was a rapid process. Summer of 1990, there was a currency reform. The East decided to adopt the Western Deutsche Mark. So with the currency adoption by the GDR of the day mark, German mark, Deutsche Mark, there was much change. There had been some change in the East. That there was some discontent. There was also some misgivings against the regime, much resentment against the Eastern regime. So all of this came into, or all of this crystallized into a massive movement. So migration, westbound migration, then a referendum on whether to reunify or not. And the referendum produced, yes, let's reunite. And this resulted in, excuse me, the incorporation of 5 Eastern Länder into the 11 Western Länder. So we have the Federal Republic of Germany. So this is a case of, in a way, an annexation of the East. This is your East to the West. Okay, so the Federal Republic of Germany enlarged, that is to say, through this unification or reunification process 26 years ago around these days. But this has brought with it all kinds of costs to, or on the part of the Western, well, before what used to be the Western, but now the Federal Republic of Germany or German government. The chancellor of the time, Helmut Kohl, 1990s, he and his cabinet in a way miscalculated the costs. As I just said, we were really thinking that the communist economy was strong, but everybody realized that it wasn't as strong as expected or as one would be thinking of. And technology was not as advanced as we were thinking. Please.
What was the reason West was superior to East?
Well, one explanation.
Factories in West, I know that, but what other factors?
One explanation is that, of course, that this was a command economy, markets were not functioning, democracy was not the rule, and that this was more or less a repressive regime. And in the East, there was massive economic growth. Political democracy had been there from almost day one. Elections were continuing in an uninterrupted way. So this was a booming economy and in the West. And the West was, the East had also seen some economic boom, but it was managed through centralized planning. Political rights were curtailed, whereas in the East, in the West, I'm sorry, you had political democracy going hand in hand with markets. So the West prospered, the East remained somewhat backward, and it was also controlled by the Soviet Union, the USSR of the time. So it was, in a way, I mean, kind of a satellite state under the Soviet bloc, ruled by the party, the Communist Party. So, so that is one explanation. There are other explanations. One is a more historical one. The east of the Elbe River had always been backward. The west of the Elbe River had always been much more open and open to ports. Market activity was much higher, much larger, much more intensive. So there were historical roots or historical reasons why the east was backwards and the west had been more developed. So industrialization came much later to the east. Industrialization had always been part and parcel of the Western life. We also had city-states, trading states in the northern part of Germany. Hamburg, Bremen. So these were lively areas that made up in the medieval times, that made up what was called the Hanseatic League, Hansa. So the Hansa area. We had in the medieval times two vibrant areas. Up north is the Hansa, the Hanseatic League of city-states, trading states, with ports. And we had Lombardia in the south, northern Italy. So as you can see, the difference between southern Italy versus northern Italy, and also northwest Germany and southeast Germany. So there are more historical reasons as to how and why the west and the east had been decoupled in terms of political as well as economic development. So strains on the budget, on the Western budget with the reunification, backward technology, unemployment jumped to 20% in the Eastern Länder. 20% unemployment from about 2 to 3% unemployment. So imagine the shock to the Eastern Germans, and imagine the burden, on the Western Germans, Western system. Costs had been rising. Unemployment benefits had to be provided to the Eastern Germans. The Eastern Germans had also been migrating to the West, and many had seen that they were getting the jobs of the Westerners. So because they were pleased to work, some of them were pleased to work at a lower wage than the Western Germans. So massive economic costs of reunification, adjustment to the process of to the what's the term here? It's like very abrupt change. Okay, so this was this wasn't done gradually. This was done very abruptly, and that there was not much time for adaptation. And then rebuilding costs also were very important in the East. Technology had to be brought to the East. The state apparatus had to be rebuilt in the East. Infrastructure had to be rebuilt in the East. Schools, hospitals, all kinds of services had to be brought together into the Western type system. This meant that there were huge costs on the budget. So early 1990s, and this was a time when Europe was going through a recession, which had some of its part because of this reunification process. And the Kohl government said, fellow German citizens, in order to absorb all this, in order to help adapt our system, we need to raise taxes. So there was, for a moment, what's called a unification tax, which was 7.5% on personal incomes. So, so more taxes. All of this change was not quite popular, which brought the end of conservative governments under Helmut Kohl, and that there was a new coalition in the second half of 1990s, a red-green coalition now, headed by SPD, Social Democratic Party, and the Greens. And the chancellor was Gerhard Schröder. So, so this is what I wanted to discuss in terms of state tradition in historical perspective, the milestones, political milestones in German history. Now I'd like to continue with political economy. The German political economy is an example of a coordinated market economy. Remember, we talked about different varieties of capitalism, that there was liberal market economies, exemplified by Britain and also the US, and coordinated market economies, exemplified by Germany. So this is one example of a coordinated market economy, networked capitalism. Cooperative network of small and large businesses coming together, and you have vested interests of different types of firms in different industries, vested interests in one another. Okay? So you have a bank, attached to it is an industrial firm. Do we have a pen here? So imagine we have this is your industrial firm, let's say a glass factory, okay? And this is your bank. The D-mark, what's now the euro. So these different firms had been coordinated in the sense that the executives here are sitting in the boards of the executive boards of the bank, and their executives are also sitting in their boards. Okay, so this was known as the bank-centric model of economic development. And also another way to describe this is coordinated capitalism, in which you had different firms cooperating as if they were a part of a large network. And these are local regional banks in most of the cities. If you've ever been to Germany, you always see Sparkasse Köln, Sparkasse Bremen. These are the savings banks of Köln, Cologne, savings banks of Bremen. So small banks, regional, local banks, working hand in hand with domestic, well, actually regional, local industries, and each has a vested interest in the life of the other unit. So they're carefully coordinated and carefully monitored. And we call this bank-centric model of economic development. When you look at the second half of 20th century, you see German economic miracle also being facilitated through this system. This is also another example of, as we shall be talking about later, as opposed to shareholder capitalism, this is an example of stakeholder capitalism. Okay, that each firm has a stake in the life of the other, and this firm has a stake in the life of the other. So this is more of a historical, the German model in a nutshell. Pre-World War II, before 1870s, we had regional economic growth, trading cities up north, medieval times. But all of this economic growth were translated into a major success with the Zollverein first, early 19th century, and the unification process in Germany. So massive economic growth, early industrialization all throughout 19th century. And by the end of 19th century, we had Germany emerging as the super industrial power of the time. So 1900 manufacturing outputs, Germany was unmatched. And in this period, in the 20th century, in the 19th century, the Zollverein facilitated all this. The customs union facilitated all this. 1870s, remember we talked about Otto von Bismarck's unification of Germany through the hands of the elite, landed aristocracy, Junkers on the one hand, and the bourgeoisie, industrial bourgeoisie. And this was sometimes referred to as the marriage of iron and rye. Rye represents Junkers, landed aristocracy, and iron represents the rising industrial bourgeoisie of the time. So and each one needed the other. So that's why we refer to it as the marriage. So there was a symbiotic relationship between the landed aristocracy as well as the industrial bourgeoisie, rising bourgeoisie. And Bismarck himself started using railroad development to unify these interests, to mediate these interests. Because in order to build railroads, you need support, right? And you need coal and iron. You get those from the Junkers, and once the railroads start operating, the Junkers will also be transporting their products from their farmlands to the harbors and be able to export their produce in world markets. State is quite active in the economy, which was facilitated by coordination between government, business, and banking. Banking and business, this was the model. And also we shall be talking about neo-corporatism. So the state's role is crucial here. The state, in a way, mediates interests. When we talk about the Sozialmarktwirtschaft, the social market economy, we'll talk about more about this. But what I want to emphasize here is that there is a tradition, even before World War II, even in the 19th century, that there is the state trying to mediate interests, not only marrying iron and rye, but also trying to mediate interests of capital and labor. So policy making, interest into mediation had always been part and parcel of the German story. 1918, war reparations. 1923, hyperinflation. The Goldmarks have been used in the stove. The Third Reich emerges with Hitler, represses workers, slave labor, produce military armaments. Those of you who've seen Schindler's List, the movie, which was a very interesting movie, and you still see some German large firms, industrial firms, being brought to the court, even in the contemporary period. Krupp, for example, was brought to the court for having a hand in this extermination process, which is now part of Thyssen Group, the company which builds escalators, elevators, which we also have in this country. We probably have some at Bilkent too. So this is the 19th century, post-World War II. Now let me emphasize that this is another model. Remember, when we talk about the US model and the British model, we generally refer to laissez-faire, right? In the French model, excuse me, we generally refer to model of economic policy making as French model of economic policy making as, in history, I hear dirigisme, very good. Here we see the social market economy, okay? Sozialmarktwirtschaft, social market economy. Let me excuse me, talk to you about economic policy side of the economic side, the market side of the social market economy. This is a model. So what kind of market is this? It's a market of, it's a regulated market. It's a combination of efficient, competitive markets, competitive economy, alongside a generous, comprehensive welfare state. This is why it's called the social market economy, okay? So generous, comprehensive welfare state alongside a competitive, dynamic, market dynamic economy. And policies, so what kind of policies are we talking about? This is very much unlike the Anglo-American laissez-faire system, but it's also unlike the French dirigisme, étatisme system. We have state intervention, which is indirect, which is only supportive. So we do not have over-regulation. So remember, we talked about iron triangles in the US case. This may result in regulatory capture. This also means that the US economy, that there are many exceptions to the rule of laissez-faire, that there was a series of regulation. In this system, we have the state intervening in a much less direct way. So there is no massive regulation behind supporting the markets. So no over-regulation. It's more of a flexible system. The state provides framework regulations, which in a way set the rules of the game. So it prepares conducive ground for firms to flourish. Unlike the US case, where we have, in the second half of 20th century, for example, the Federal Aeronautics Board and the federal authorities regulating airlines restricted the size of sandwiches provided in order to provide a competitive, fully functioning, competitive economy. So prices were regulated. There were price ceilings on airfares. We never had this in Germany, or much less so in comparison to what was happening across the Atlantic. We have a smaller size of nationalized industry, and we have cooperative federalism in the sense that we have a powerful land government, state government, and there is much delegation of power to the land level. So in that respect, there is much delegation to the land level. And it is in this context that we can speak of a flexible type of regulation. Bank-centric model, which is an example of stakeholder capitalism, that we have a bank, a local regional bank attached to a local regional industry. And we have, each having a vested interest in the life and therefore profits of the other firm. We have in Germany what's called the socially responsible capitalism. And socially responsible capitalism means that we have a high wage, high productivity, and high welfare economy. But despite high wage and because of high productivity, and also because of high welfare, we have a competitive economy. The Germans would like to see their system as socially responsible capitalism. We have high skills or skill development. We have works councils, and we have R&D strategies, all coordinated at the firm level, but also facilitated by the state. High skills means that the education and training system had been there. The German word Meister, masters, tradesmen, craftsmen, had always been there. Especially in the era of proto-industrialization, early industrialization, this was very important. Apprenticeship system had always been very important. Apprentices working with the Meister. So vocational training systems had been very important in Germany historically. So skill development has been one of the most important goals in this economy. We also have very competitive industries, the German cars, car industry, automotive industry, chemicals, machine tools, industrial electronics, and all that, of course, are all hallmarks of the German competitive markets, competitive industries. Works councils is another institution which has been a central part of the socially responsible capitalism. These are firm-level institutions elected, whose members are elected by workers, by those firms, or in those firms, to voice their interests. So works councils are important institutions organized at the industry level, at the firm level, I'm sorry. We have workers coming together, elected by other workers, representing all interests of these workers to the management of the workers. So
There is a kind of syndicate.
in a way, this is a firm level union. In a way, this is a firm level union, or a union organized at the firm level. Very autonomous, but of course accountable to the workers. Okay, so there is negotiation, there is consultation, there is collaboration, there is cooperation at the level of the firm between management and capital. Between management and employees, labor and capital. So these are not unions, but in a way a coordination mechanism within the firm. And they also implement vocational training programs. They also help implement vocational training intra-firm, within the firm, vocational training programs. They also help train apprentices in that particular firm. So they help coordinate some of the firm's activities. So they're multifunction units. And R&D, research and development. What's research? What's development? We may have talked about this. Where do you do research? What's research? What's development? What's development? We know what research is. We have an idea about what research is. What's development? Any ideas? There is research. That's a Turkish word for it. Research and development, araştırma, geliştirme. But it has something to do with technology. You do research. Then what's development? We hear research. We hear about research. Huh. Okay. Okay. So you modify something and you make some other product or a service. Research is what we do at universities, in labs, in private or public labs, right? We know, we have an idea about what research is. It has something to do with science, has something to do with observations, and we also, this is the science behind it. This is the research behind it. When we develop it, that research, we have a marketable product for sale in the market. So this is the product of research first, then development, because it's sold in the market. Okay, so it's a developed product. You develop a service or a good, a product, to be able to be exchanged in the market. So the German system also is known for its emphasis on R&D, adapting to new technologies, refine competitive sectors, which result in high levels of competitiveness worldwide. And one last element of the economic policy aspect of the German model is the Bundesbank. The Bundesbank, with the memory of hyperinflation back in 1920s, 1922, had always been very cautious about the specter of inflation. Had always been very cautious about any rise in inflation, very sensitive to the chief economic evil in its, from where it stands, inflation. So price stability had always been a very important goal of the German central bank. Yes, fiscal policy had been expansionary, but monetary policy had been quite tight when you look at the 20th century, when you look at the second half of 20th century, because of the memories of 1920s. Remember, we talked about hyperinflation and that the worry of inflation again. So there is many never agains in this country. So inflation, never again. War, never again. Okay, so these have been, and especially for many Germans, it was in a way infused in the culture that it was this inflationary period which really produced Hitler. So in order to avoid this, never again. So there's much aversion towards inflation. And because inflation is associated with all kinds of ills. One is fascism, another is, total war, total destruction. So inflation, an aversion to inflation, and an emphasis on what's called stability culture, an emphasis on price stability, an emphasis on sound money, an emphasis on stable finances. okay, which in a way facilitated the German economic miracle in the post-World War II period. Please.
We are talking about monetary policy, which is regulated by the central.
Yes, of course.
What is the deal after the World War First?
First World War?
Yeah, about the central. Because we saw plenty of charges dictated by the
Treaty of Versailles.
Yeah, and they Pasha paid. And,
They paid some
yeah.
a hefty part of it. They started paying, but then Hitler came and said, I'm not paying all that.
In this case, what's up to central?
The central bank, the Bundesbank, before World War II and Bundesbank after World War II, you have two different logics. Well, the Bundesbank was founded after World War II. The central bank of the period really could not resist the political events. So in that period, 1920s, after World War I, Treaty of Versailles, the government felt that it needed to print money in order to repay the reparations, the war reparations, the compensations, the humongous debt, which was twice the size of German GDP. So what can you do? You had to print money, you had to pay them to the Western powers, the Allied powers, and then at home, what does a gold mark mean? It just means nothing. It just basically meant that this was the value of the gold mark had been plastered really. So the psyche of bankers at the Bundesbank, the stability culture, never again. No, we detest inflation. We do not want to see inflation. So price stability, stable finances, sound money had always been very important in the eyes of central bankers. So which really facilitated a period of massive economic growth with very low levels of inflation, even after the world economic crisis of 1970s. So even when we had rampant inflation worldwide, we did not have much inflation in Germany, excuse me, in the 1970s, also in the 1980s. So very low inflation, and by doing this, the state prepared in a way a conducive ground for the economic miracle to happen. I think I should stop here and then discuss the social policy aspects of the Sozialmarktwirtschaft next time. Any other questions? No.